very excited about our next guest, Bill Wong, AI and data analytics leader at Dell. He is going to wrap up our session by looking at creating an ecosystem of for AI in your organization. So Bill, please go ahead, toggle your camera on, and I'd like to welcome you. Welcome, Bill. Bill is coming to us from Toronto, Canada, to the world. Great to have you with us, Bill. And in his current role, Bill is the AI and data analytics practice leader for Dell, responsible for Canada. He's the author of a number of books on data analysis and data management and a quarterly AI newsletter. Former enterprise and cloud architect roles with Bill included work with development at IBM and consulting with Oracle. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Bill Wong. Thank you, Bill, for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you, Jose. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share our best practices with your conference participants. So let's see here. As I mentioned before, now in the 33 minutes remaining, I'm going to talk about digital transformation projects. And the biggest and most complex deals that I've had the opportunity to work on were related with digital transformation. So we'll give you a quick snapshot there. And then we'll go into AI specifically and share with you what we've learned and with working with our customers. And a big thing these days is looking at multi-cloud and how we can take advantage of that. And so a little bit about Canada. So forgive me, I just want to kind of put a plug of what's interesting about Canada and AI. Back in 2017, we're the first country in the world to announce a national AI strategy. AI is big. I'm not going to go through all the details here, but in 2018, if you've spent time in AI, you'll know these names. Geoffrey Hinton, often considered the godfather of modern AI with his work at U of T. And two other folks, Yoshua Bengio, Jan Kuhn, if you're familiar with Facebook, he's the AI lead researcher there. But in Canada, we're really well known for AI, developing the algorithms. And also we have a number of labs, commercial labs that have been developed located in Canada. At Dell, every 2 years, we do this massive survey worldwide. We target 4,300 decision makers and from mid-level to C-level executives across 18 industries. And so here, if we take a look at the Americas, I think everybody's seen that the pandemic has really accelerated people with their digital transformation projects here. So you see less and less people over time as being digital laggards or followers because they need to set this up to actually conduct business. And if we take a look at some of the programs that are really popular here, not surprisingly, cybersecurity is very important, and remote working was proliferated throughout the world. And Canada kind of lines up the same here with the Americas here. And then last, transforming, making the experience on a digital platform to differentiate your offerings. The top 3 barriers here that we have found, and if you want, you could go to our Dell site or contact me on LinkedIn. We have all the detailed statistics that we've collected here across the world, across all geographies. But data privacy and security remains a top concern. Budget is a concern, although my colleagues talking to Brian and Jose, often I view budget as kind of not having the right leadership, the right awareness for certain projects. And number 3, and why we're here today, is to better understand how can you get access and extract value out of your data. And again, part of the survey, we surveyed people and asked, in the next 1 to 3 years, what kind of technologies do you see yourselves investing more in? And again, no surprise, security's up there. Data management tools, so this includes analytics. And then here we deviate a little bit from the Americas. In Canada, multi-cloud's becoming big, but I'm sure that's happening in the US as well. It should be hopefully no surprise that AI is really thought of in the boardroom, along with data analytics, as the best potential to change the way they do business, to differentiate the offerings. And today, it's also the fastest growing workload in the data center. Now, I've been trained as an EA and cloud architect, and one of the first questions I ask when I speak to a C-level exec is, do you have an enterprise architect? And you, unfortunately, maybe you're not surprised, many organizations do not have an enterprise architect. And I think this role is critical for adopting new things, especially like AI. What I've done here is that many of you are probably familiar with the Gartner hype cycles, but AI has become so pervasive that they need multiple hype cycles to keep track of just how much influence AI is having. So on the left-hand side, we'll go into detail. A lot of this is technology infrastructure to make AI applications run better, and we're going to go into more detail there. On the right-hand side, you see new forms of AI coming up. I won't go through that in detail. These are still emerging. Generative AI, where you create content or edit content. Unfortunately, this is the type of technology you can use to create deep fakes, but again, still kind of evolving these forms of AI. But you can see that AI is very pervasive in emerging technologies. One thing I do when I speak to companies is have and sell an architected approach to implementing new technology like AI. Even though it's new, it should have the rigor of other kind of architectures that you're all familiar with. And if you've been trained with TOGAF, you should recognize most of these steps. And here's a sample artifact, and we'll get into more details here that I built jointly with the customer to say, hey, as we adopt AI technology, let's step back before we pick technology. What is your kind of architectural principles for adopting technology? And for most places, they want AI technology, they want it open, they want it to be able to perform and scale, they want it somewhat less complex. They know it's going to be complex to some point, but something where you don't need a small army to maintain. Of course, availability, privacy, security, important, data quality. So many of these things hopefully should be familiar with you. So this is an example that I presented to a CTO at a hospital. And again, I worked with them to find out what are the important technologies they see AI impacting. And for this hospital, probably one of the biggest ones are these two actually, where they want to take advantage of all the new IoT or IO, Internet of Medical Things devices out there to integrate that kind of data. They're also well known as being a training hospital. So they're looking into augmented and virtual reality. And we have a number of hospitals actually in Ontario, especially with COVID. It's difficult for a lot of folks to get that practice at the operating room. Many have implemented this type of technology. Again, a good practice in developing a strategy is to define what are the business drivers here. And for this hospital, not surprisingly, patient care was number one. They also mentioned before, they're a learning hospital. They wanted to foster that learning environment. They also wanted to be a trendsetter and be known for research. All right, so what do these companies have in common? I know I can't hear you, but I'm going to guess that most of you will recognize most of these icons here, especially this one, ordering things out. But I'll bet you that most folks don't know what this icon is. And Jose will buy you a free lunch if you know what that icon is. Okay, so that icon actually belongs to a company called GraphCore. GraphCore is a startup chip manufacturer, and they're building chips to optimize deep learning algorithms. So in selecting what we call AI accelerators, and this is the chip technology that powers the servers where you run your AI algorithms. On the far left, you have technology that most people are very familiar with, CPU-based serial processing, either Intel or AMD processors. Next, if you've been following NVIDIA, they're the 800-pound gorilla, known for doing high graphics, parallel processing. Fortunately, that kind of processing really aligned well with deep learning. So they've done very well in the past few years and continue to do well. And actually, I don't really see a credible competitor yet in the GPU space to NVIDIA at this time. FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays. This is chips that are flexible that you can code at the firmware. So that's the advantage here. As you go to the right, they're more optimized, but they kind of lose its flexibility. But with the FPGA, if you can code at the firmware level, is quite flexible. I see these deployed mainly in niche type of environments, manufacturing, retail, not as well as adopted as GPUs. And then finally, ASICs. So ASIC processors, application-specific integrated chips. So this is where GraphCore fits in, and multiple other chip manufacturers. You've heard AWS say that they're going to start building their own chips here and move away from Intel. And so all the startup capital is going here. There's a plethora of choices here. And so GraphCore is at Dell. We've implemented their chip. We're the first commercial offering of the GraphCore chip. So the Dell strategy for AI is we don't know who's going to win, and so we're placing our bets on all of them so that we have offerings that cover the whole gambit, and we'll see what the market decides. All right, so some real world examples and things that we're seeing here. If you come from the medical community or healthcare, or been following the developments and advancements in COVID research, you'll know that in order to create a vaccine, it's very useful to understand the three-dimensional structure of the virus. And that's difficult to do with microscopes. I mean, that's how they do it. But how they did it for the COVID molecule, and they actually used software that came out of a person from the Toronto startups, is they use AI to predict the model or the three-dimensional structure of the virus. And as they're doing that, they take their prediction of the model and they run protein simulations to see if potential vaccines will have an effect on the molecule. This convergence of AI and kind of high-performance computing is something that is relatively new. We're seeing it in healthcare, we're seeing it in financial services, and people are going to places like the Lawrence Livermore National Lab to try to get access to the huge amounts of compute power required to run both AI and HPC. And so this market at the very high end is growing, where you have a pipeline that combines both deep learning and other types of analytics. And just to put a quick plug, we do recognize that, and you won't see this yet from the hyperscalers or the public cloud vendors yet. But today you can get a platform to do traditional HPC, and if you're familiar with those tools like Bright Cluster Manager and Slurm, but also you can provision an environment on the same platform to do PyTorch, TensorFlow, Kubernetes, etc. This is a unique platform. I haven't seen another platform in the industry yet that can do that, but I'm sure they'll come. A little word about developing AI applications. A lot of folks have developed tools to make people more productive, and it is an important part of the ecosystem. We'll just say that the on-prem solutions on the left, it's like the Wild West. If you follow this magic quadrant, vendors have been changing positions quite radically. So there is kind of like no best tool, but the ones in the leadership quadrant are the ones that have endured the best over the past 3 years. On the right-hand side are the public cloud vendors, and not to be outdone, they provide these types of services with their offerings as well. But if I was to compare the two, I would say that the on-prem have a bit of an edge today. It's not to say that these folks can't catch up, but most of these services are probably some of the most underutilized services from the public cloud vendors. Most people go there for platform as a service or infrastructure service, but not necessarily machine learning as a service yet. A best practice in developing AI applications is to create a data platform to support your analytics. At a very high level, most logical architectures will consist of a landing zone where you have a place where you can bring in data, be it near real time or batch loads. And then the process of transforming that data, cleaning the data, collecting, consolidating that data takes place. And then optimize data stores so that you get really fast response times to the different users or personas that are out there, all sitting on optimized infrastructure, having data governance here. Now, I'm currently involved in a POC at a research center, and what they want to do is build an AI sandbox. And they find today they have 40 AI projects going on right now. Each researcher has their favorite development tools. They search and get their own data, and then they beg, borrow, and steal for infrastructure. And that's kind of how a lot of organizations are doing AI today. Because a lot of the tools to govern this is still relatively new. What I'm proposing to them is to move toward a model type environment. And we're going to focus on these two here, data as a service and platform as a service. So there are a number of tools out there, and I've listed a few, is where that with a touch of a button, you can deploy your servers, your storage, your favorite software tools, and make it multi-tenant so your work doesn't interfere with somebody else's work. So that's a platform as a service. And then what is emerging, and if you're in this field, you've probably heard of a number of products to do data as a service. And this is where a lot of researchers lose a lot of time, is can I share this data? Is this data trusted? And so there are other players out there. Calibra comes to mind. Boomi acquired a company called Unify, and for a product called Data Catalog and Prep. But what these products do is, once you load on the data, you're presented a catalog of what data is available to the researcher. And it doesn't get on the catalog until it's been cleaned and vetted, perhaps redacted if necessary. So this kind of technology I view as a great productivity tool for the researcher, and I believe this will become more popular as time goes. This is a bit of an eye chart, but again, the ecosystem is, we touched on some of it, but on hardware, servers, IoT devices, on software, there's lots of software stacks to consider, frameworks to do deep learning, orchestration software, typically Kubernetes is the most popular, or tools to do that, like I showed in the last screen. A deployment model, be it on-prem most people will want a cloud deployment model, but that could be a hybrid on-prem or in the public cloud. Okay, so when I talk to people implementing AI, and this is true for this one financial services firm I talked to, they have a huge effort right now to put everything in the cloud. And so they're doing that. And a year later, they said, we're spending more money now on IT with having everything in the cloud than we did before. And so they did a stop and say, okay, well, what really makes sense? And they decided that, okay, there are some projects that are great for the cloud, but others, characteristics for the business, data privacy, size of data, that it might not make sense to be the optimal platform. So many customers I'm working with are stepping back and saying, okay, let's take a business approach rather than a technology jump in and everything must be cloud. Now, it should be no surprise to most folks, the top three vendors here, everybody's heard of their offerings, AWS, Azure, and Google. What might be a surprise to you, and a surprise to me too, actually, is VMware, Dell's offerings, and just on AWS, we've received really great adoption from customers out there, and also with our hybrid offerings. So I would predict in 2021, when you include revenue from what we're doing with Google, with Microsoft, that will be in the fourth place this year. Now, this slide we could spend the entire presentation on, and so we have some time, so I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I don't mean this to be a complete summary of all the technologies, of all the services. The ones that I'm focusing here on are the things associated more with analytics and AI. You know, if you're going to do this properly, of course, you're going to have to talk about security, but I'm going to assume that you're going to worry about security before you think about these kind of things. So, so what I've tried to do is identify some of the key services people look to in having a platform be provided to them from AWS, Azure, Google. I've then positioned what common on-prem and partners that we have at Dell to provide the same kind of service. And of course, to keep everybody honest, I've listed the open source options as well. Now, just because I've been able to find an offering to fill in the blank doesn't mean that these products are all the same. You do have to do research. These products are very different. Oh, some are very different in capability and adoption. There's a wide swing on which one of these are well adopted. But I'll give you a hint. If you see a product which name you don't recognize, and it's probably the third or fourth generation of that product, and they keep changing the name, that product probably has had challenges in finding adoption for one reason or the other. So most of the data is still out there in structured form, SQL, that's an important piece. Data warehouse, typically these are scale out, share nothing type of databases out there. And again, each one has their own here. NoSQL databases are becoming very popular. I'm actually seeing Hadoop, while popular in the day, it's finding, or companies are finding other alternatives to Hadoop, and one of them is NoSQL databases. So these are databases optimized that are non-relational. I see a big uptick for graph databases. And if you're not familiar with graph financial services, this is where they uncover potential fraud when people hide money. To uncover all those relationships, they discovered that using graph database technology. Now, everybody does have lots of forms of analytic offerings here. Governance or the data catalog. So as I mentioned before a few slides ago, this is a really important technology to provide data as a service. And the capabilities of these vendors vary widely. So it's worth your while to kind of step back and do an assessment before you adopt any of these technologies. Okay, so compute, containers, best practice to do kind of a ML ops, use container Kubernetes-based technology. Serverless, function as a service. What I want to talk about here is multi-cloud. So I'll just put a short plug for Dell that you may have heard of an Apex project. So this will be Dell's orchestration tool that will integrate with AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, and you can monitor that all from a single pane of glass. Now, to Google's credit, Anthos, this allows you to have the Google Cloud experience on-prem, and Anthos has been extended to also integrate with AWS, and they do have a kind of an early version for Azure available. Azure and AWS at this time, their multi-cloud offerings are only to provide the cloud experience on-prem that is the same as the public experience, public cloud experience. So you work with AWS and only AWS on-prem, same with Azure. Will they change? Time will tell, but the strategy here, at least with Google and Dell, is to try to recognize that people will need access to all different types of clouds, be it public or private. So a few more slides here. In working with a university out west, they needed help in trying to understand how their algorithms could best run. And we have a facility in Austin, and it's available as a value-add service, no charge for the right kind of situation. We have a cluster there of a massive amount of Intel processors, another one with AMD, and one more than 100 nodes of NVIDIA GPUs. And so I've used this with to help out a number of institutions better understand how best to optimize the running of their algorithms and to give foresight into what kind of configurations of hardware and software they would need going forward. We also have other labs around the world focused on safety and security solutions, and this is owned by our IoT division. And what this does is it works with third-party vendors out there. So case in point, one that was announced last year is a thermal vision detection platform. You could use thermal vision cameras, install them. They have mobile versions, but we test it out with NVIDIA GPUs. And this does all the integration testing there. And we validate these offerings because there's so many moving parts to make these things work. So it's a great value-add service if you're into building this. So this is my last slide, so we might have a little more time for questions here. I know I went rather quickly here, but the best practices here, and hopefully if you have a background in analytics, you'll know that the journey in providing this is unique for every type of digital transformation initiative. But number one, I think, is really to have the culture that you want to be data-centric, data-driven. I was speaking to an executive of an $11 billion firm, and they just simply didn't believe in analytics. It was a construction type industry. They said it's okay for predicting perhaps when things will break down. They get the value there, but for forecasting, everything was more kind of a gut feel. So, okay, well, I can't help you. I can provide you some examples where other people have benefited, but the culture just simply wasn't there. And believe it or not, quite a few firms are still like that. And for AI, despite it being new, they could really use the guidance of an enterprise architect. So to take a look at it holistically, to take a look at it from an application, a data, a technology perspective, that you want to go forward and create a shared infrastructure to have this governance. Because in many places, even banks, it is like the Wild West. I was speaking to one bank. The IT team was so frustrated. They would have one line of business come up to them and say, "Hey, I need you to help me build this infrastructure. And by the way, I can do that for 50,000 was their estimate." Then somebody else would come up and say, "Can you build me this infrastructure? And by the way, this will cost you 5 million." So the IT folks are really getting frustrated, and they're really looking for help. And I spend a lot of time actually, not just with data scientists, chief data officers, but kind of educating the IT staff to better understand how best to go forward in architected fashion, rather than just provisioning hardware and software that they ask for. So I mentioned before, for AI accelerators, that our strategy is really to place bets on all types of technology, be it FPGAs, be it ASIC processors like GraphCore. Of course, we're the top partner of NVIDIA, also of Intel and AMD. So you have your choice there. And our strategy is also to work and build an ecosystem with all the leading partners out there. And when I say build that ecosystem, we take that complexity out by pre-testing them, pre-configuring them. So many of even the open source offerings, you're going to see Dell come up with these innovative ready type offerings where they include open source technology. A good guiding principle when you build these things out, you want infrastructure that can scale. And again, you want an infrastructure too that helps reduce the complexity. And again, being an open source fan, we're going to make these cost effective. So that's it in a nutshell. If you go up to the presentation or my LinkedIn, I'll post this up. I have links here if you're interested in any of the technology offerings I spoke about. These are, well, in the, yes, active links if you press any of these lines. Okay, Jose, I think that's my presentation.
I was here saying fantastic all along, and I realized I had myself muted, so you couldn't hear me. So I apologize for that. And the great presentation, Bill. Wow, what a great insight, and the depth of what you cover was excellent. So if you could please now go ahead and stop sharing your presentation so that you and I can be on camera a little bit bigger for the audience. And I am very much looking forward to the questions from the audience, and I'm going to relay that to Bill in real time. But Bill, I will start off with one of the comments. Some of the comments that happened during your presentation is that we have quite a different across industry representation and different levels of expertise with AI in the audience, and from technical experts to business leaders. And if you could look back in the last 12 months, there's so much going on in the field of AI. If you look back the last 12 months, of course, we have been like through a pandemic during that time. But I think despite that, the development of AI continues regardless of whatnot. It may be even accelerated during the pandemic. What have you seen in the last 12 months that you think is most meaningful in terms either of a development or maybe a solidification of old things that are being applicable now for value creation? What comes to your mind that has been meaningful in the last 12 months?
Well, for me, I've had the opportunity to work with all industries adopting AI, but because of the pandemic, I think healthcare has been the industry that has been accelerated, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but it's certainly been accelerated. Typically, drug discovery development takes anywhere from 10 to 15 years is the average. And as everybody knows, since the pandemic was identified, we have vaccines like in a year. It is just unheard of. And to get there, AI played a key role in helping identify the molecule and test out the vaccine. And I think we're all going to benefit from that. I'm probably going to develop a presentation just on AI and drug discovery because it was so impactful. I think that's the number one industry. And going forward now, people are looking to AI to help assist with remote care. And these are technologies that will impact you and I on a personal level. Of course, there's AI benefits in all other industries, productivity gains, etc., making life easier. But for quality of life, this will impact us.
That's terrific. Yeah, even if for those who may be watching from a certain distance, it was not long ago that we're having talking about AI and folding of molecules and things like that. And then some AI applications that have been very successful in a lot of those types of examples. And we had the SAP, a presentation from SAP Artificial Intelligence as well on the business applications of AI that are growing. And really in the last 12 months, maybe they sped up as people had focused more on certain digital technologies and understood the value of AI. What do you see as still the major current challenges for organizations to adopt AI effectively?
So I think still it's really having that data-centric culture. And I get a lot of companies wanting to do AI, and then when I talk to them, I find that they're traditional silo-based companies. They have an ERP system, they have a supply chain system, but they don't share data internally. And that's saying there's no magic button. There's a lot of hard work that you need to prepare before you can really produce your own AI. So for those firms, AI adoption will be coming by buying an application that has AI embedded into it. But they're not going to be part of the groups that are innovating and leading the charge, which I find a lot of folks do want to do that. But the price to pay is you have to be able to share data, treat it as a corporate asset. That culture really has to be in place. And then, of course, having an enterprise architect, the firms that have that really accelerate their adoption. The hospital I'm working with, the first question I asked the chief technology officer was, after he told me what he wanted to do, I said, do you have an enterprise architect? And he said, no. And I said, hire one, because you need that person who has a holistic view. And they did. That's the good news that came out of that.
That's a great segue for the topic of course, of this conference on the role of enterprise architects on leading AI for organizations. How do you see that? What is the role that enterprise architects play for successful implementation of AI systems?
So, like with other projects, the enterprise architect should be that person you come to have a picture of the benefits from a technology perspective, but a business perspective as well, to align the technology. There are too many AI folks who are really excited about the technology, who just jump in, let's play with all these great tools. They forget that they need to sell this up the line to senior management. And nobody's better equipped to do that than the enterprise architect.
All right, let's have a little fun with this. Some of the commentary that has emerged here has to do with the with the development of AI and maybe a potential level, reaching the singularity, if you will.
I do get
How
that.
are we, Bill, when it comes to cognitive capabilities of AI, the engines, or whatever you call the systems that are being developed today? I know you keep your finger on the pulse of a lot of that stuff. From a research and development perspective, how is AI progressing? Is it progressing along the line that we expect towards a certain singularity? Some people will say a few decades from now, some will say in the next 5 to 10 years. Where do you put the developments? How much of it is factual, how much of it's just hype?
Yeah, it's funny. I used to in pre-pandemic days, I would do an AI roadshow across the country, and there was always somebody in the audience who goes, "How far are we away from Skynet? Is that going to happen?" And I think we're still far away, although I think 10 years is very optimistic, but you never know. You never know because when in 2016, when DeepMind developed a system that could beat the best Go player, that was at least 10 years ahead of schedule. Most people did not think. And the research that did that, by the way, based on reinforcement learning, that came out of University of Alberta, Edmonton. So another Canadian contribution to that. So 99% of the AI apps are very what we call weak, very singular in purpose. To do generalized AI, still a ways away. Will quantum computing help it? I'm not convinced yet. So but I am an optimist. I think 10 years, we're going to continue to see some disruptive technologies that will advance that. But it's not there today. The building blocks are still aren't there yet.
Yeah, for sure. As you mentioned, going from domain specific AI to a generalized AI is a lot more than just a normal progression. That's maybe it's not even on the same line. It's a paradigm shift, right? And but who knows? We don't know what we don't know, and human ingenuity is always fascinating. What's getting you excited about AI right now? I mean, you have covered such great depth of content here, and the breadth of this content. There's so many possibilities that you have just shared with our audience. Be selfish now, Bill. Tell me about your pet project. When you're working on AI and you are working with organizations right now on all these different areas, what are some of the things that you get excited about? Because you either see a lot of value or it's just really a paradigm shift of some sort. What gets you excited about the AI field this day?
So my pet projects, things I'm endeared to, and where I read research articles, is in the healthcare industry. And I typically will post a quarterly AI newsletter that I write. I give those to certain Dell customers, but I do post it on my LinkedIn as well. But I spend over half of it talking about how AI is changing the way we deliver healthcare. And I think I'm interested in that because I did write a book many moons ago on proteomic genomic research analytics. There's so much opportunity there for advancement to improve people's qualities of lives and to reduce costs. But the bureaucracy out there in any country, it doesn't matter which country you pick, healthcare is a difficult and challenging service to deliver well. So I'm hopeful, and I'm always interested in understanding how can we improve people's lives.
That is fantastic. That's great to hear. We have one final question here that we have time for, and this one is coming from Ribamar Matias in Brazil. And Ribamar is asking, he's asking, Bill, what is the recommended first steps for an organization to adopt AI? Like, if we don't have it and we want to adopt AI in our information ecosystem, there are budgetary constraints, so we have to start small to then scale. How can we start small and scale with AI? Is there a way for us to do that?
I think the best way, and thanks for the question, is really a small group of people just do just enough architecture, is you really need to define a strategy. AI is neat out there. Sure, it's a new shiny thing, but why would we bring AI in here? What is the vision we have for taking AI forward? Why should the rest of the company care about it? Where are we going to impact? Will this reduce costs? Will this improve the customer experience? Will this make us safer in how we deliver services? Is it a risk compliance? Those three things are common in most industries and quite often the reason why people will first adopt it, rather than create something brand new. That's great, and some people can do that and create new startups, but it's usually traditional business drivers that are the key. And keep a small group, small budget, scope it, find some interesting use cases, go to the line of business and find an executive backer, right? This will not be driven through IT. They don't have the clout politically. And again, it's still kind of all new technology to them.
What terrific insight and advice. Bill, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise and vast practical knowledge with all of us. And on behalf of over 2,000 registered participants, we're very fortunate to have you and very grateful for your generosity in sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure, Jose. Thanks for inviting me again, and thanks everybody. Contact me on LinkedIn if you have any questions.
Thank you, Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Bill Wong, AI and data analytics leader for Dell, and Bill makes a great closing for our 3-day conference on enterprise architecture. I hope you gained some great insights from the many presentations we had and the exchanges we had. I certainly welcome everybody's participation and engagement throughout these sessions. As you remember, we will be sending you a recording of all of the sessions starting next week. You should receive an email with all materials and links and password to access the recording of the sessions. Don't forget, next week we start another great 3-day conference focused on robotics process automation and intelligent automation. I'm going to be making a post about that on LinkedIn. Of course, you can go and register for RPA and IA Live through the many links that we sent to you in the chat during this conference. And we very much look forward to seeing everybody at RPA and Intelligent Automation Live next week. So saying goodbye now from San Antonio, Texas. It's been a pleasure to be with you for these 3 days, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.